Dear guests, dear Svenja, dear friends, on behalf of the organizers, I welcome you warmly to our conference. The logos on the materials show that very many organizations of civil society have convened, and there are even more guests and speakers here. I welcome all of you very warmly. We succeeded in convening shortly before the replenishment conference, which will start on the 19th of September in the US. The German civil society and experts from North and South are united in their wish to support the Global Fund. When I was Minister of Development, in 11 years, I got to know many tools and organizations, and many of them were contested, and it was quite right. But the Global Fund is uncontested. What kind of organization is that? It's an organization that is supported from very different areas. It is a very successful organization. When Kofi Annan, more than 20 years ago, together with the G7, established the Global Fund. And I was lucky to participate at the establishment when I was a minister. And I was also responsible and committed to the funding. At that time, people in Africa were demonstrating and fighting for their lives. We were facing an incredible amount of global injustice and unfairness, because the treatment of HIV/AIDS, TB and malaria showed very clearly that the place you live in and also your sex, your gender, were the decisive factor whether you stayed alive or not. And if that did not cut your heart, that means that you don't have a heart. Since then, however, the number of deaths from HIV, TB and malaria could be reduced by 46%. How was this success possible? The Global Fund is an inclusive organization. Many of those who went to the streets in Africa, who fought for their lives, were in the institutions several months later. They participated in the meetings of the Global Fund and were able to contribute their experience to the decisions of the Global Fund and support fighting these epidemics. And this contribution, this partnership, is an organization principle of the Global Fund. By the way, and I say this off the record, a new fund to fight pandemics is being constructed at the moment. We still don't know about its concrete tasks, but it's already receiving money. And we can congratulate this new organization. I think probably it is appropriate if the World Bank takes a look which experience and capacities the Global Fund has in order not to reinvent the wheel, because that would be a pity, particularly in view of the great necessity to fight the three pandemics. The Global Fund is a very efficient organization. The expensive treatment that we thought about some years ago could become much cheaper due to intelligent mechanisms. In 2014, the Global Fund contributed to distributing malaria nets and treatment, and to sell them for 30% less, and the price for antiretroviral therapy could be reduced by half since 2014. That was possible because the Global Fund supports partner countries with establishing treatment facilities, laboratories, and so on. 50 million lives were saved by that. And then COVID-19 came 2 years ago, and many countries are just not able to cope with this additional burden. Despite the support they get from countries like Germany, we have seen a lot of setback, and what that means will be presented to you during our today's discussions. I will remain with you in the course of the whole day. I am going to listen to you and to note down what you tell us, because it is important. It's not only important to listen to the opening and the closing panel. COVID-19 is the reason why the Global Fund and its partner UN AIDS and Stop TB and Rollback Malaria are also with us today, why these organizations calculated that for the coming 3 years we need at least $18 billion in order to stop that negative development and to get back on track. I personally am convinced that it is also important for Germany to understand these global problems and to mobilize the financial means. We don't only have to be able to defend ourselves with military means, we also have to defend ourselves against pandemics and diseases, and I frankly tell you that this means that the basic law of Germany, which says that we have a limit to our state debt, is an obstacle. We should stop that, and we should see which resources are necessary. With this said, dear Sonja, it is great that what you've already told us this morning, that the German government has announced its goal for the replenishment conference. That is 1.3 billion euros, and that is a very important signal to the people, but also to the other donors, who hopefully will follow suit and also give their pledges. Thank you very much on behalf of the Friends of the Global Fund. And now Tilman Rüppel will continue, and I will sit down because at the moment it is very difficult for me to stand. However, this does not prevent me from being committed and from traveling and working. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. These were very important words, and I would also like to repeat the 1.3 billion euros, which is a very important signal. We are very glad to hear that, because the devastating consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic led to the fact that the health-related Sustainable Development Goal 3 and ending the 3 epidemics, AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria, in many countries of the world until 2030 will hardly be reached. Today, in 2022, half of the SDG period already passed, and we have to get back on track in terms of fighting the 3 epidemics as soon as possible. To reach this aim, health systems have to be strengthened and universal health coverage has to be extended. Both are areas in which the Global Fund invests a lot. In many countries, the fund is an important implementation mechanism. Apart from that, the inclusion of key communities by the Global Fund is often a life-saving element, which is particularly important in view of our aim to strengthen health systems. In the investment case for the 7th Replenishment Conference, the Global Fund presents detailed calculations showing which financial resources are necessary to get back on track in fighting HIV, AIDS, TB and malaria. In the coming 3 years, the Global Fund needs at least $18 billion, but also other sources of funding from development aid institutions and domestic resource mobilization in order to get back on track to end the 3 epidemics. However, according to the calculations of the Global Fund, a much higher overall funding is necessary to reach SDG 3.3. Germany's fair share to the Global Fund that was calculated by the German civil society amounts to 1.8 billion euros, and therefore the claim of the Global Fund that Germany gives a pledge about at least 1.3 billion euros at the conference is just the absolute minimum investment if Germany is to fulfill fulfill its international responsibility. The lesson we can draw from the COVID-19 pandemic is that we must never underestimate infectious diseases. This also means that we have to remain committed to supporting the important funding tools for global health, such as the Global Fund. Both the success stories connected to the fund since its establishment and its today's relevance in the fields of healthcare and strengthening health systems are convincing reasons for giving it the full scope of resources claimed. With this conference, we want to get closer to this goal. The conference is planned as follows. In our opening panel, we plan to discuss which contribution the Global Fund makes to reach the SDGs and what the global community can do to get back on track in terms of reaching SDG 3.3. In the 3 sessions after that, we will discuss the 3 epidemics, AIDS, TB and malaria, individually. It is very important for us that the international civil society is included into this conference and that activists participate in the discussions. We have also got rapporteurs from the different communities who will create subjective reports on the single sessions, which will be available as video recording after the conference. Now, I wish all participants, of course also those who participate digitally, a successful conference with exciting discussions, which hopefully will be an additional component for a successful replenishment conference. Let us support the Global Fund in saving millions of lives. And I was also asked by the organizers to add that it is very important that everybody wears their badges during the whole conference, because the photographer can see from the color of the ribbon who is okay with being photographed and who not. And now I pass the floor to the Executive Director of the WHO.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, we were off track to achieve our global targets for HIV, TB, and malaria. The pandemic has set us back even further. But the pandemic also demonstrated that diseases cannot be tackled by the health sector alone. It requires intersectoral cooperation in coordination with communities to address the broader determinants of health. We can only achieve the SDG targets if we work together to reach key affected populations. In July this year, WHO launched the new consolidated guidelines on HIV, viral hepatitis, and STI prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and care for key populations. The guidelines offer evidence-based interventions to address structural barriers such as decriminalizing behavior, reducing discrimination in the health sector, and preventing violence. Strong community-based health interventions linked to primary health care are a critical pathway to achieve the health targets of the SDGs. I commend the Global Fund for putting communities at the center of its new strategy. WHO fully supports the Global Fund's replenishment, and we remain fully committed to our continued partnership, and we work together to end the epidemics of HIV, TB, and malaria for a healthier, safer, fairer world. Thank you. I wish you a productive conference.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, for these encouraging words. And I think Dr. Tedros has set the tone in 2 ways. Firstly, that we continue in English for the next speakers. So we switched to English, and he led the way. But secondly, also for the ambition that we have for the fight against the 3 diseases. My name is Andreas Hübers. I'm head of advocacy at the Deutsche Stiftung Weltbevölkerung, DSW. And I have the honor of co-moderating a very impressive panel today with very diverse perspectives, together with my co-moderator, who is sitting on the very left.
Good morning, everyone, and I will continue tradition of speaking English at this event. My name is Raminta Stoikide. I'm the Senior Advisor of Underserved Population Program in Geneva.
Thank you, Raminta. I would love to introduce, before we get to the questions, the panel, of course, and I'll start on the very left side. Bettina Hagedorn is a rapporteur for the Social Democratic Party for the BMZ budget, but that is not her only role because she's also vice chair of the budget committee in the German Bundestag. Herzlich willkommen. We have added, or we had the opportunity to add Bettina Hagedorn for this panel quite in the last minute. So we will have a strong parliamentarian and parliament's voice, but only at the end of the panel. Second in row is Ephraim Gomez, Chief of Staff at UNAIDS. A very good and warm welcome. The woman that was already the focus of the press conference this morning and continues to be in the limelight today, of course, is Svenja Schulze, Federal Minister for Development, Economic Development and Cooperation. Herzlich willkommen. And we are as international on the panel as we are in the audience. And I am joined on the panel today also by Valeria Raczynska. She is Director for Human Rights, Gender and Community Development of a Ukrainian charity. And her charity goes by the name 100% Life. Welcome. Okay, so Minister, I would like to start with you, if I may. We are as, oh, sorry, no, I forgot Peter Sands. Sorry, Peter. I meant to start virtually because it happens so often that you forget people who are online. And then I not only did not start with you, Peter, I even forgot you. I'm terribly sorry. You are very visible. I hope you can hear us well also. Okay, great. So Peter Sands is joining us from Geneva, I suppose, although I'm not 100% sure. From the airport, is joining us from the airport. And Peter Sands is Executive Director of the Global Fund for the Fight Against AIDS, Tuberculosis and Malaria. Hello, Peter. Thank you for taking your time and joining us virtually. Great. Okay. Now then, coming back to you, Minister, as we are just 3 weeks or less before the replenishment, 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks before the replenishment. In your view, what do you think the Global Fund needs in the next 3 years, and what contribution can the German government give for those ambitions that the Global Fund has?
First of all, I would like to say that Peter Sands is really important for the work the Global Fund is doing. We never forget him. It's just because he's online. It is really important that we have people who do the job, who do the pressure to the governments, to all the donors, and that Peter and his team is really great on that. So I like to say thank you to Peter and his team for all the work he's doing. Please. And yes, you know, Germany is one of the biggest donors of the Global Fund. We give a lot of money because we are convinced that the Global Fund does really important work, and that it is important to give the funding to help people. It is all about people, and at the end, we are able to fight against malaria. We are able to fight against tuberculosis and AIDS, but money is needed for that. It is so simple. To save life, we need the money, and the Global Fund needs the money for that. But it is not all about money. It is also about the strategy the fund is going forward. And Heidi mentioned it before. This fund that has no people who say it is critical, they do the wrong job. No. The Global Fund, everybody is convinced that they do the right work, they do it community-based, that is very important. They engage NGOs, they do prevention, that is really important. And so we need the money at the end to do all the jobs. So Germany will give money. You mentioned it before. I just say it again. We raise our budget about 30% to 1.3 billion euros. I think that is the right. That is the right signal, and I hope that others follow us, because it is important. It's not enough Germany is doing so. We need also the other ones, and we do it with the help of the parliament. So I can say thank you to Bettina, who is here, because we have 1.2 billion in our budget, and then we have 100 that we give to debt swaps, and that is with the parliament who allowed us to do so. I think that is also a good signal to say, pay attention for the debts the people, the countries have. We need also a solution for that, and combining that through the debt swaps, I think that is also a good signal. So the target of 30% increase, it was reached by Germany with the help of the parliament, and I hope that others follow us now, because that is what is needed, 30% more, I hope that this conference gives also the attention for this really important topic to push the last donors we have to give more money.
Thank you, Minister Schulze. Now, come to Peter Sands. Next, Peter, you are traveling and therefore not with us in Berlin, but I hope you have heard the news that the minister has shared just now about the 100 million extra for the Global Fund. I would like to ask, of course, Germany is only one, albeit a very important donor, only one donor. What would success be for you on the day of the replenishment, and what still needs to happen in the next 3 years? But also, what maybe in your view are the scenarios that expect us concerning the 3 pandemics if we don't meet the ambition?
Thank you, Andreas, and I'm really sorry not to be with you in person. I was in a region called Pwani in Tanzania yesterday, and the logistics of getting from there to Berlin defeated me. But it's great to be with you virtually in any case. And I want to start by acknowledging and appreciating the contribution of Germany to increase to 1.3 billion euro, a 30% increase, given all the other pressures and demands and domestic fiscal pressures and so on. It's testimony to the commitment of Germany to the global health agenda and more directly to the lives of people in so many parts of the world. And I also want to say, and thank you, Minister, for your kind words, but I also want to recognize your personal leadership here. I appreciate that right now, it's kind of hard to convince people in even the richest countries in the world that they should be looking beyond their borders when they can see their own energy bills, their own food prices going up, and they're looking for their governments to support them on their own needs. It takes real leadership to articulate why it is so important that we don't just look within our own borders, but we look broader, and particularly to those whose lives are most at risk. And it's a confusing time right now. There is so much going on in the world: food prices, energy prices, the horrible war in Ukraine, climate change driven events. We haven't finished COVID. But ultimately, it's the same people whose lives are most at risk. It's the poorest people in the world. It's those who are marginalized through human rights related barriers or gender inequalities. And often these other crises turn into infectious disease crises. We see flooding fueling malaria. We see refugee movement of refugees fueling TB. We see interruptions to prevention programs for HIV. Coming back from Tanzania was really a refresh on what it is we're doing. How much we've achieved. It's dramatic what has happened in Tanzania over the last 20 years. And it's not just at the level of the individual disease metrics, its whole life expectancy has improved enormously. But there are still such big challenges. The situation of adolescent girls and young women. We need urgent, bigger scale action. We need to reach out to the still probably 200,000-ish people in the country who are HIV positive, but not diagnosed and not treated, often hiding because of the stigma and discrimination. On TB, I saw a mobile TB diagnostic van and saw how effective it was in reaching out to communities. The trouble is, there are 5 of them in one of the largest countries in Africa. We need, and with 5, you simply cannot reach the entire population. If we really want to get on top of TB, we need to scale that up. And on malaria, our progress has slowed. Both the mosquitoes and the parasite are, in a sense, getting smarter. They're becoming resistant to insecticides. They're becoming resistant to artemisinin-based treatments. So we need to step up our game on malaria. So that's why it's really important that Germany, alongside Japan, the United States, are setting the bar and saying we're prepared to step up and contribute 30% more, and we need other donors to follow in that mark. Because we need at least $18 billion. When we did the calculations, and this was not just the Global Fund itself, but WHO, UNAIDS, Stop TB, and so on, the only disagreement was whether $18 billion was enough. And it isn't really enough, but it is the base from which we can start. So we absolutely need to get there. And to your question, Andreas, about scenarios, it's very simple. It's tragically simple. If we don't achieve $18 billion, many lives that could be saved will not be saved. And this is not just a question of numbers. This is a question of individual people, of families, of communities. This is an avoidable tragedy. So we absolutely need to achieve that. And I just want to quickly finish by saying a couple of comments about why I think the way the Global Fund Partnership works is so powerful. It is, of course, about ensuring people get cost-effective, quality medicines and the appropriate services. That's the core of what we're delivering. But it's not just that. We won't beat these diseases by biomedical means alone. It's also about tackling the human rights related barriers, the stark gender inequalities that put so many women and girls at risk. We've got to do those as well, and we've got to do it better and harder and faster than we've done in the past. It's also about empowering communities and enabling communities to take leadership, to protect themselves rather than, in a sense, doing things to people and communities. It's one of the bits of magic of the Global Fund is the role of communities at every level, from the board through to the CCMs, through to the delivery of services. And finally, it's about building systems. We know we can't beat these diseases by just disease-specific interventions. We know that we have to build resilient, people-centered, inclusive systems for health, including the community systems for health. And that if we do that, we won't just beat HIV, TB, and malaria and beat back COVID-19, but we will protect people everywhere from future pathogens. So if we can do those things, we will hugely accelerate progress towards the SDG 3 goal of health and well-being for all. But it will take the kind of political leadership the minister has demonstrated, and it will take money. So that's what collectively we need to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Svenja. Thank you, Director Peter. I think your comments are very clear that we can have cautious optimism for the replenishment of the Global Fund. And I think, secondly, that the success of the Global Fund replenishment is major part of the answer how we get back on track, but it's not the only answer. And I think at the press conference, somebody was mentioning that in addition to the Global Fund, we have also to look at national governments to make sure that they fund their fair share. So a lot is even to be done about money. And I think at the press conference, somebody was saying also that it's not only about money, and Peter just repeated that again. So I want to turn to the panel to ask what's in addition to money and how to make the money work, and how to make the Global Fund money work to end the AIDS, TB, and malaria epidemics. And first, I would like to turn to Efraim Gomez from UNAIDS. The 2021 United Nations Political Declaration on HIV/AIDS had two parts of the title. One part was saying getting on track to end AIDS, and the other part was ending inequalities. Why inequalities? Why that's the message? What does that mean for HIV?
Thank you, Raminta. And before I answer your question, just to say thank you again to the organizers of this conference. I'm honored, humbled to share the space together with you and so many experts, and also jointly with the leadership that we've seen here, also intergenerational leadership, I would say, by Germany in support of the global response against HIV, TB, and malaria. We've been beating the drum on inequalities at UNAIDS, and we have support, we have grounds to do that. You remember, and Peter mentioned the SDG 3. Back in the days when they were adopted, the SDGs, many would call the target number 10 on fighting inequalities the orphan SDG. Today, it has many custodians, and we're happy for it. Because we need to close, there is an iron law between pandemics and inequalities, and it's that pandemics thrive on inequalities. They follow the fault lines of societies. And this is where it's necessary for us to change optics and tack in the HIV response, and we've done so by building on the inputs from our constituencies and communities. We had a very participatory process in the development of our global AIDS strategy, which is fundamentally the blueprint for the HIV response. And then we gathered the international community, and they actually agreed to very bold commitments and targets that speak to those inequalities that we need to fight to beat AIDS. And they are fundamentally of two categories. One is the inequalities that we have within the response. Those we need absolutely too close, because they are ours to deal with. Then we have a host of inequalities that affect the response. Those are more difficult, but nevertheless necessary for us to work to. And the good news is, of course, that for us, UNAIDS, we're a joint program, we have co-sponsors, and Dr. Tedros and I think Peter and others have also alluded to this, say, it's the multisectoral approach that we need, to get to the end. And we've known this, all of the time, but now we have a new concept and understanding that I think that we can work towards with our focus on beating the inequalities. And of course, I mean, it's also it's also how you work towards your goal and which actors you empower to reach it. When we speak about communities, and I'd say that is probably the answer to many of our questions on how to reach the ultimate goal is by empowering those communities and seeing the larger benefits of the response also in building resilient and sustainable health systems. But we have very clear examples which we've called out at UNAIDS on these inequalities in our last report, the Danger Report, where we say that the HIV response is off track. The most, I'll mention 3, adolescent girls and young women, every second minute one is infected with HIV, avoidable. 5 key populations, what we call key populations, make up 5% of the population, but 70% of new infections around the world. That's another inequality, avoidable. And the third one that I could also mention is potentially that children living with HIV, only half of them are on treatment. It's outrageous, even in sensing that we have the situation. And so, but the good news is, of course, and that's, that where we're gathered here today, is to see how we can help in addressing and closing these inequalities that drive HIV, but so many other of the health emergencies that we are confronting today.
Thank you very much, Ephraim. I turn to you, Valeria. Ukraine is really in our minds and in our hearts these days in this unspeakable war that is taking place now and Russia's invasion. And maybe you can expand what solidarity means to you in this particular context, and also expand what is the communities at the center. What does that mean in practice for you in Ukraine?
Okay, thank you so much for supporting Ukraine, and thank you for your nice words. And okay, I'm a very practical person. What for me means solidarity? You can say like a lot of blah blah, we support you, we love you so much, but okay, solidarity for me, it's like contributions. So, and I really appreciate like a contributions of Global Fund that continued their programs in Ukraine, that even increased in money, that created like a special fund for medications, like emergency fund for $15 million for our patients. It's their technical expertise that they provided like from the first day of war, first day. It's like, it's not a joke. So for the programming that they did in first 10 days of war. So with big respect to CRG team, they, together with us and technical assistance, they reprogrammed all the programs for human rights, for the needs related with war in 10 days. This is impressive. This is wow. Solidarity to me, it's increasing contribution of Germany and commitments of German people, because like a part of this money is for Ukraine too, and beside of this, Germany contributes a lot in like a direct help to Ukraine. This is solidarity. When country has its own problems, but never forget about another people that like are in not such good conditions. So, and solidarity that we can see from Global Fund and all countries that contributes in our HIV tuberculosis response. It's communities that like in the center. It's people-centered approach, because the new strategy of Global Fund put the communities at the front of everything. And in each intervention today from our honorable German partners, we could hear community-led responses as well. This is our solidarity. Because resilient medical systems cannot be possible without investing in the communities. Because medical help, medical care, it's not just infrastructure, it's not just medications, it's people firstly, it's medical doctors, it's integrated services together with social workers and together with community-led work. So only with all this integration we can have really good results. Because sometimes, you know, even good word can treat person and bad word can kill. So medications is good, but medications with love like much better. So thank you so much for your solidarity. That's not just about words, it's about actions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Valeria, for also mentioning the treatment with love. I think that that's a new slogan that will trend. I turn back to Minister Svenja. And I wonder whether you wanted to comment on the underserved and disturbing statistics that we heard also from Ioannis, from Ephraim, who was mentioning about young girls, adolescent girls and young women who were really affected even before the COVID pandemic. But we know that even more girls are not in schools because of COVID. And we know that in East and South Africa, 63% of new infections in 2021, according to UNAIDS, were among them. Yeah. What the Global Fund and we as the global community could do better for them?
I think first of all, that are alarming figures that we see there. And if anyone needs an argument why a feminist development policy is needed, that is an argument. It is a difference between boys and girls. There are differences between women and men. And we need to fight against these structural causes of these differences. You mentioned it before, it is about inequality, and fighting against inequality means that we also need to empower women. They are not only vulnerable, that's not only the role of women. Women can be agents of change. They can be powerful, but they need help to do so because of all the inequalities in the world. So fighting against these inequalities is really an important point, and the Global Fund is doing so. He's going to the roots of the problems. The Global Fund helps the system of health, so that is really important. It works with communities so that it is that the people who are affected are part of the solution. So that work of the Global Fund, that is what makes him so important, and that is what is the answer to the questions. Going to the roots of the problems, don't work only on the surface, go deeper in the problems, work against the real problems, and fight against malaria, AIDS, tuberculosis, really to eradicate them. That is what the fund is doing, and that is so important.
Thank you very much, Minister. I like hearing this more political dimension of our need to respond to the pandemics in order to get back on track, but also to end the three pandemics that we have in the world. And I turn then to Peter Sands. Yes, the Global Fund is the donor, is the financial instrument. But the new strategy not only puts communities at the front, which is often political, but also it even speaks in some places about diplomatic voice and sort of more influence. It speaks about decriminalization of populations. It speaks about much more about the structural, addressing the structural barriers. Can you tell, what's your expectation, what the Global Fund will do in its partnership differently within the new strategy to address those health inequities structural barriers and promote, for example, feminism agenda?
Thanks. And I do think this is one of the important sort of shifts in the new strategy of the Global Fund, is being even more upfront about the fact that we can't succeed simply by taking a clinical or medical approach to these issues. As the Minister has said, I mean, these structural inequalities that so many women face in the world, frankly, by the time it becomes a biomedical problem, we've already lost some of the most important battles. It's about violence, it's about power dynamics, it's about educational disadvantage, it's about economic disempowerment. But also, if you take other key populations, you mentioned decriminalization. One of the things that I've done, and I think we need to continue to do, is step up our engagement with other agencies and organizations, such as in the world of drug users, UNODC. I recently spoke to interior ministers from around the world about the fact that criminalizing drug use is such a self-defeating approach. And it's a tragedy when you look at it from an epidemiological basis, when you look at it from what it does to the lives of people. And I think we do need to be stepping up the way we articulate these arguments. Now, it doesn't mean we should always be brandishing things in front of the faces of different governments. Sometimes that's self-defeating, but we should be choosing how and when and where to fight those battles, but we should be fighting them. And we shouldn't do it on our own. UNAIDS and the Global Fund often work very effectively in tandem on these sorts of issues. And there are a multitude of other agencies. With Stop TB, we work very closely on this. And indeed, one of the things that I think has been very encouraging over the last couple of years has been the growth of a more powerful voice of communities affected by TB. I was very struck, actually, when meeting civil society organizations in Tanzania earlier this week, that the TB civil society organizations were among the most organized and vocal. And a few years ago, that probably wouldn't have been the case. So I think collectively, we have to acknowledge, measure, and deal with these kind of structural barriers, because otherwise we will waste money on drugs that won't get to the people who need them, on services that won't reach those who are most vulnerable. And so we absolutely need to do this. And we should also acknowledge that progress in these sorts of things doesn't come in sort of smooth linear. It's the process of getting a bill passed in Parliament that can be difficult and complicated. It's the process of changing cultural attitudes. It's the process of bringing broader sets of community leaders on board of different ways of looking at things. And so with all these kinds of ways of doing it, I think we can make progress. We must make progress. But this, as it is going to be a bigger part of what we do as a partnership.
Excellent. And this leads us to next sort of a couple of questions that my co-moderator asked on the partnerships, exactly.
Okay. So Valeria, I'll turn to you again. I was really intrigued by the way you described how the Global Fund changed the modus operandi within the first day already, and then had a program done in 10 days. And I was wondering, from your own work, if you look at the programs that your organization has, how does it work in practical terms? Like, if hospitals are being bombed, how can you continue? If doctors might, be fighting the war rather than treating patients? How you know, in your very own or your organization's own operations, how do you manage to then get the funding that you get into helping people?
So in Ukraine, about 75% of medical facilities were damaged by airstrikes, were occupied, so somehow they cannot provide like any services. So for example, in Luhansk Oblast, on newly occupied territories, no one medical institution functioning at all. So they cannot provide treatment, not even like a general population, neither like a HIV treatment as well. The biggest problems for us on occupied territories is that Russian occupation authorities not treating patients at all. And in some regions, it's forbidden to accept anything from Ukraine. Yes, and but thankfully, because of Global Fund programs, we could deliver medications in hard-to-reach areas, like front lines areas, through our volunteers to deliver, you know, from hand to hand, from social worker to patient on the occupied territories. So we can expect that, okay, we cannot save all the treatment programs. Yes, regretfully, but it's weren't in our forces. But we could like a significantly decrease amount of people that out of treatment now. And plus, you know, all these new treatments that we have, like innovations, dolutegravir, so 1 pill a day, one can like for 90 days. It's a big deal as well, because you can give people medications just not for 1 month, but for 3 months, like in one can. This is very important. So we're still addressing these issues. One of the, like, I don't know, very sad examples of how war interrupting services and impacting lives. It's tuberculosis hospital in Chernihiv Oblast, that were bombed. Actually, and thankfully all medical staff saved all the patients. They were in bomb shelters. They displaced them in another area, but no one day treatment were interrupted because of heroism of medical and social workers that work with the people. So I can say that with a great partnership, with the consolidation of all the efforts, even the situations that we have in combination right now. So in Ukraine we have epidemic of HIV, tuberculosis, COVID, this still continue, plus war. But because of our trust of our partners, not even donors, partners. So with, you know, with contributions of governments, with resilient medical systems that Global Fund invested a lot in even in education of staff, that they knew what to do because of COVID preparedness and so on, and with greater involvement of communities, so community-led responses, we can overcome everything. But you know, the sad story, very sad story. So what is the price of this? This is price of lives that we lose every day.
Okay, thanks. It's really hard to imagine the situation under which you are working, sitting here in Berlin. But it's at least good to hear from you that you have partners. You are not being left alone. So.
Let me add out a little bit, but you know, we just want to tell our partners, our donors, that our organizations, we're not going to give up. All of us, we're going to continue. Just invest of us. Let us fight with everything. Give us some tools to fight. Give us medications. Give us money for social support. Give us food for people, because it's a problem. 30% of gap in economy. So we do not have a money in the budget. So support us. We will fight. Our organization work on the front line. They're not going to leave, because in their country, they don't want to lose it.
Thank you. Thank you for a very concrete and very heart-touching example of how you know, the partnership works. And although it's hard to take this very concrete and very personal experience that you have at a bit more general level, Ephraim, I would love to end with you and hand you the words for the final question on this panel. and that is we heard a lot about added value of the Global Fund, the value of the partnership that the Global Fund brings to several countries and organizations. And I would love to hear from you from a UNAIDS perspective. Where do you see the added value and maybe the evolving partnership with a Global Fund? What does it mean to you?
Thanks, Andreas, for that question. Maybe to zoom out, because we have a quite complex ecosystem, I would say, in the HIV response, but it is effective. We achieve things. Yeah. And I think that, and the way that we've structured it is really, we have the Global Fund as one of our prime mechanisms to resource the response. Shouldn't forget that domestic resources are the most important still, right? But still. And within this complex, I think that the main actor and the driver behind our achievements remains the inclusive element, that we have in the response. It's civil society and communities participating at all levels. And that's true also in UNAIDS. We have a unique board in the UN system because civil society sits on our board. And that makes us effective. We're also the only, sadly, joint program of the United Nations with 11 co-sponsors. UNDP, WHO, UNICEF, everyone is there. It's cumbersome, but it makes us more effective also in the response and relevant in the response because it needs to be multisectoral. So we can generate, that we do, UNAIDS today, world-class data, pandemics data, state-of-the-art, the next generation, what we need to beat pandemics and inequalities from that perspective. It helps us be the trailblazer on human rights of some of the most marginalized and criminalized communities in the world, right? And push the envelope. For instance, we know now what we need to do. We need to reinforce our work, redouble on adolescent girls and young women. This has been not missing, but we haven't done enough, as Peter said and the minister said. And so we know this, and we will do that. And the third piece that UNAIDS also does is, of course, that we have a technical role in supporting the Global Fund to make the money work. And we do this at global level. We participate in different structures of the Global Fund to help to really ensure convergence between us. And I think that you've heard today that there is a very strong convergence between us. And also at country level, we support countries in accessing the Global Fund money, for instance, and we participate in the CMMs, etc. And so these are roles that we play, UNAIDS, and that we would like to continue to play and enhance. I mean, it's a growing partnership, but it's even in some instances given more concrete manifestations, such as our work on condoms together. But the sky is the limit, really, I would say, for how we could what we can do over the next the next cycle for the Global Fund, and to conclude on the Global AIDS strategy. But all parts of the HIV response need to be fully funded, and unfortunately, UNAIDS is not fully funded. It's something that we work intensively to correct, and we feel support from many of our constituencies across the world for that. And so our board is much engaged in this, but we look to many supporters of the HIV response to, in addition to the political support that we will need, especially to beat the very difficult social determinants and the structural issues of discrimination and marginalization, but also the financial support that we need to do our work, including to make the money work for the Global Fund.
Okay, thank you, Ephraim, for reflecting on the diverse aspects of the strong partnership, but also for reminding us that, of course, other organizations also need the funds to achieve things together. Thank you so much. Ich wechsle jetzt nochmal aufs Deutsche.
Now I would like to switch, ladies and gentlemen. So, for those of you who do not understand German, please use your headphones and benefit from the translation. So, now I would like to make a voice heard coming from the parliament, from the government. I've already introduced Ms. Bettina Hagedorn. She is She is the representative of the Budget Commission and the Vice President, so to speak, and I would like to repeat that because it is of utmost, it's quite special that she is here today because there is, it's the budget week here at the German Bundestag. There's a tight schedule for everybody, but for you, I know that it's quite a lot of work because you have roll call votes, etc. So we are very happy that you're here today. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for taking your time and taking part. It's lovely that you're here on the panel, and I think you will also stay for one other session. So it's really lovely that you're here today. And I would like to know from your side, what about the discussion regarding the Global Fund within the Parliament? And I mean, because you injected another 100 million euros, not US dollars, and how did that happen? I mean, how did that happen in German Parliament? Yes, thank you very much. I'm also very happy to be here today, and it's a great honor, and it's really from the bottom of my heart, I'm very happy to be here today, and this is most definitely the responsibility regarding the budget of Svenja Schulze. I think it plays an utmost important role. The Global Fund plays a very important role, and it has a huge fan club, a fan base in the German Bundestag, and I have been a member of the Budget Committee for 21 years, and when you, Heidi, when you were minister, we worked closely together, and I think thanks to you, there is a huge fan base, or the Global Fund has a huge fan base in the German Bundestag, thanks to your work and your commitment. And since 21 years, I'm also part of the audit, so the accounting control of spendings in the German Bundestag. This is why it is not always about how much money you spend or to whom we give money. It is also about our convictions. So is the money used effectively or not? And this is one of the reasons why we have this huge fan club of the Global Fund in the German Parliament, because we know every cent is well spent. So we furthermore know that we have multiple crises going on in the world. They're overlapping. The situation is not getting easier. No, on the contrary, they're kind of exacerbating. And now it is not the time to stop our efforts. We have to make even more. And of course, we are proud of being or having the presidency of the G7 at the moment, and that the world looks at us. And this is high time, or our time, to set a signal, to make a sign. And I don't know whether you know this, but we had different consultations regarding the budget for this year, and these have been the first budget consultancies, or let's say consulting rounds for this government, and it was quite different compared to the rounds before under the former government. And of course, we are still in the midst of a pandemic, and then February 24th came on for this young government who hasn't been in power for not even 100 days. It was quite a big challenge, but still, we started our budget proceedings and proceedings of Parliament, and we got together, we talked about the different approaches, we talked about the Global Fund, and we almost doubled our support for this fund. And I mean, it was a young government with new members of Parliament who haven't been familiar with each other and with this topic. I think we can say that they did great work, and we know that we are living in troubling times, and the crises are getting bigger and bigger. And it is, of course, difficult to stabilize, to perpetuate the money and the spendings, because the crises become bigger, the challenges become bigger. But nevertheless, we try to to do everything we could. Of course, we would like to suspend the debt brake or the debt limit, but we can't do that. I can't promise you that because we don't have the power to suspend the debt brake. But on November 10th, we will again get together and talk about the budget and the proceedings in Parliament. And I will most definitely advocate for enhancing our support. And Svenja, you know that I'm at your side. I'm most definitely on your side and at your side. But still, in times of crises, it is really difficult to do more. And last year we've talked about the crisis in the parliament, and I mean it also touches the German people. And yesterday there has been we talked about the budget of the federal government, of the Federal Ministry of Defense and Development Cooperation, etc. And I think we kind of set a right sign with the 100 billion euros. But nevertheless, I would like to say that together with my colleagues from the Budget Committee who are in charge of this specific budget, we will make a travel. We'll go traveling because we don't have much time. But at the end of October, we will go to Moldova and Ukraine in order to really show that we're there to set the signal. We do our best. I can't promise you anything at all, but nevertheless, we have been really successful in our deliberations, proceedings of Parliament, and regarding the budget. And still, you know, we won't fail, and I will continue my support, my strong support for this cause. Thank you very much, Ms. Hagedorn, for this important signal and sign, and for your support, of course. Before thanking the panelists for their great input, I would like to show you one little video.
The people who suffer the most from AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria live in the poorest countries with the weakest health systems. And the heaviest burden falls on the most marginalized groups. Over the last 20 years, programs supported by the Global Fund have saved tens of millions of lives and cut the death toll by more than half across all 3 diseases. I commend the commitment of the German government in the global fight to end AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. This fantastic leadership will improve the health of the world's most vulnerable populations, strengthen health systems, prevent future pandemics, and help us regain the ground that we lost due to the pandemic. I believe this work will go down in history as one of humanity's greatest achievements. So let's rally together and get back on track. Thank you so much.
Okay, and this message from the co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Bill Gates, of course, only has been able to be played today due to the time difference that we have between our 2 continents. So thank you so much for the very spontaneous message, Bill Gates. With that, I want to thank everyone here on the panel, Valeria Raczynska, Bundesministerin Svenja Schulze, Chief of Staff Ephraim Gomez, Bettina Hagedorn, and of course Peter Sands, Executive Director of the Global Fund. I think. I've been working on the Global Fund for many years, and still I've had new aspects and new elements and new joy also listening about the results that the Global Fund's work can show and will hopefully with the German contribution be continued to achieve over the next 3 years and beyond. And I think you all contributed with your perspectives, expertise and passion to the very great panel. Thank you so much.